Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell here, and once a week, every week, when the House of Commons is in session, well, there's one day in particular that the Prime Minister is guaranteed to be there, and in the question period for that day, all of the opposition leaders have an opportunity to ask the Prime Minister any question they want to. And this week there was a particularly interesting debate in which Aaron O'Toole, the leader of the Conservatives, and Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, questioned Justin Trudeau on some pretty interesting topics. Now, I watch every single one of these question periods each week to try to bring you the most important information so that you don't end up watching hours of it, but this time I want to show you this question period directly because they asked some pretty interesting questions. We have information on inflation and how we're seeing inflation rise here in Canada, along with housing prices and the affordability concerns, and from the NDP, they're questioning, hey, how come big banks are raising their fees at a time when they've actually been experiencing record profits? So those are the things we're going to touch on and hear responses from Justin Trudeau in this video. But before we dive in, make sure to check out the link in the description where you can get 45% off the Canada Money Mastery program, where we teach everything that you should have been taught in high school about money. And there's even a section in there about house hacking, one of the best ways in my eyes of saving up to buy your first home, buying that home, and making a little bit of money on it. So check out the link in the description and see if that program's a good fit for you. All right, let's dive into this question period where Trudeau has to answer some difficult questions.
Mr. Speaker, everything is getting more expensive under this Liberal government. And now we have the proof. Last month, inflation powered through the government's target to a 10-year high. Lumber is more expensive, houses are more expensive, food is more expensive, life is more expensive. How much more is this government's economic failure going to cost Canadian families?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we made a simple promise to Canadians, that we'd have your backs, however long it took, whatever it took. And that's exactly what we did. By supporting Canadians right away who lost their jobs because of this pandemic with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, by supporting small businesses across the country with things like the wage subsidy and the Canada Emergency Business Account, we have been there to support Canadians through this difficult time. And we've seen, Mr. Speaker, our economy bounce back quicker than other economies around the world because we've been there to support. We will continue to be.
Okay, so interesting. It was a question about inflation, and we hear a response here on how the Canadian government, at least in Justin Trudeau's opinion, is here, and they've been actually able to support many Canadians through many of the benefits that we've seen. And this is sort of hinting at the fact that it seems like he knows there's a link here between the additional spending that we've done on these programs and the potential higher cost of living that could come as a result of it. If you didn't catch the video that was on this channel about it, well, last month we saw a pretty dramatic increase of inflation here, reaching record highs certainly over the past 10 years of 3.4. That's our inflation rate. Now, the Bank of Canada, well, they're not too concerned about this because they believe that this high number that we're seeing, it's compared year over year, right? And when we look back a year, well, we actually had a slight deflationary period here where we had record low inflation, largely because of price drops and demand drops at the beginning of the pandemic. So the Bank of Canada are saying, hey, this inflation that we're seeing isn't that big of a deal because we're comparing it year over year. But many critics of the Bank of Canada and other people who are pointing that out will say, hey, well, even if you're not looking at it a year over year, we see the month over month inflation here has gone up as well. So it's going to be an interesting story to get this new data for May to see, hey, is this bar going to look a little bit like that, or is it going to cut off and sort of even out much like the Bank of Canada believes it will? And although he doesn't say it directly outwardly, the fact that Justin Trudeau responds to this question from the Conservatives about inflation by saying, hey, we had a whole bunch of necessary spending we had to do, well, it says that, hey, he might be recognizing there might be a little bit of inflation, at least in the short term in our future, but at least in the Liberals' eyes, that was a necessary evil to provide the support like the CRB and the changes to EI and these benefits that have helped people along the way. And for anyone new to the channel, it's my goal to stay right down the middle when it comes to this sort of thing, so I can just sort of bring you the information I think is important for you to know, and you can make up your own mind about any of these topics and let me know down in the comments what you think of it all. But then the Conservatives shift their focus from talking about inflation to talking about housing and how so many Canadians feel so frustrated that they may not be able to afford a home in their own country. Let's listen in on what Trudeau has to say in response to Aaron O'Toole on this certainly pressing topic.
But Mr. Speaker, this government is the first one in Canadian history country to make it impossible for Canadians to aspire to home ownership. Inflation is making construction more expensive. Only the wealthiest first-time buyers will now qualify for a mortgage, and the government has been studying capital gains taxes on principal residences for years.
We'll get to that.
Why is this government making it harder for Canadian families to get ahead?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's in fact not true. One of the very first things we did when we took office was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. Then and Conservatives voted against it. And we brought in the Canada Child Benefit that puts more money in Canadians' pockets every single month to help with the cost of raising their kids by not spending and by not sending checks to millionaire families like the Conservatives did. We've continued to invest in affordable housing and working towards a Canada-wise early learning and childcare system to lower the price of childcare to $10 a day in the coming years. We've continued to make life more affordable.
Okay, so some interesting response and an interesting response to an interesting question. Let me explain why I think this is so interesting. Of course, we see Trudeau here sort of answering the question in a roundabout way, bringing up many of the other programs and plans that his government has brought in with the recent budget. But I want to first start with what Aaron O'Toole said about the capital gains tax. As of right now, here in Canada, when you sell your home, you don't have to pay capital gains tax or tax on the increase in value of your home when you sell it. Now, the Conservatives seem to think that the Liberals are really focusing on potentially bringing in a tax on this capital gains on a primary residence. But I wanted to talk on that because the Minister for Housing and Affordable Housing here in Canada, well, he's said multiple times inside of the House of Commons in the past 2 months in the videos that I've been watching on replay that the Liberals are currently not considering this, and he said that rather outright. Now, I don't know if the Conservatives think that the Liberals are planning this tax to be added on to Canadians when they're selling their primary residence, but they're just not saying that that's in their plans. It's a little bit confusing that they're sort of harping on this point, even though the Liberals have said to the public, we're not going to do this. But then inside of Justin Trudeau's answer, which touched on many things that weren't housing related, he did mention that they were planning on bringing in more measures for affordable housing inside of their recent budget that they had released. And I want to show you that because I think it's a little bit underwhelming. Take a look at this. This is the actual budget, the text from the 700+ page document. Take a look at this. They say the government has a plan to invest $2.5 billion and reallocate $1.3 billion to create or construct, repair, or support 35,000 affordable housing units. And they're saying this is going to help with the housing affordability problem. So they're spending around, $3.8 billion to even just upgrade and create some new units, but only 35,000 affordable housing units. Now, I think this is likely not going to be much of a drop in the bucket when it comes to housing prices in Canada, because there's over 14 million housing units in Canada, and the government's going to add or even just repair 35,000 of them. So I think that's more just a drop in the bucket of the overall real estate market, and it's not really an answer to this sort of problem that's going on, and I think that could be by design. Housing is one of the largest GDP producers here in Canada, so in certain industries, it's okay to let the bubble run a little bit. Or at least that might be what the Liberal government is thinking based on their relative inaction when it comes to this. We're actually seeing a little bit of a softening of real estate prices, so it's going to be interesting to watch this going forward, and I'll keep you updated here on the channel what happens on that side of things. But then we need to switch over to listen into what Jagmeet Singh of the NDP had to question Justin Trudeau about, and it's largely big banks and the fact that they've received record profits over the pandemic, but are also raising fees on potentially at-risk Canadians. Let's listen in.
The pandemic was difficult for people, but not for banks. Banks made billions of dollars in profit. In spite of that, they've increased service fees, and worse. The Liberal government has the ability to stop them, but continues to let them increase service fees. Why does the Prime Minister refuse to stop banks from stealing this money from people?
Okay, so I want to provide a little bit of context there before we hear from Justin Trudeau. This has been a topic that's being covered in the news pretty heavily right now. We see this headline here saying Canada's big banks are seeing their profits soar, and they go through how they're making their money. And if I switch over here and I tab over here, we also see a CBC article where they say customers are calling out banks for increasing fees during the pandemic while profits are up, saying that account fees have gone up. The account minimums have also gone up. So so the amount that you need to hold in your bank account before you, so that you don't have to pay monthly fees as well as charges for overdrafts. All of these in many major banks are going up. Now let's listen in on what Trudeau has to say in response to this question from Jugmeat.
In 2015, we increased taxes on the wealthiest 1% of Canadians and lowered them for the middle class. The NDP voted against this measure. In the last budget for 2021, we ensured that digital service providers pay their fair share, set up a tax on yachts and luxury vehicles, and started tackling aggressive tax planning, and is fighting tax havens. We will always defend the middle class and ensure that everyone pays their fair share.
So a little bit of a non-answer from Trudeau. We see the leader of the NDP asking specifically about big banks, but Trudeau answers more of a broad question, and it responds to the sentiment that usually comes from the NDP that the Liberals aren't doing enough to support the middle class and the lower class, and saying that they're being too soft on the wealthiest Canadians and big businesses. Trudeau responds saying, hey, in our new budget 2021, we have a whole bunch of things that we're doing to sort of to answer that question. There's a tax on luxury cars, luxury boats, luxury planes for the wealthiest Canadians, as well as some closing of certain tax loopholes. But most analysts believe that this won't make a significant dent, especially in terms of generating revenue for the government to implement future programs. It's definitely going to be interesting to watch each of these issues, the inflation, the housing, as well as the fees for big banks and tax on certain wealthy Canadians. It's going to be interesting to watch how that plays out going forward, especially given the fact that it looks like we're going towards an election maybe in the fall. So it's going to be especially important to watch how these issues develop. And it makes me curious about what you think on all of these issues. Let me know down in the description. I read every single comment and I try to reply to as many as I possibly can. Again, I don't usually show this entire clip from question period, but I thought, hey, it's all of the leaders of these federal parties sort of duking it out. So I thought you might find it a little bit interesting. If you want to see content like this in the future, make sure to subscribe. I post regularly all throughout the week, so you're going to stay updated by clicking that red button. And make sure to check out that link in the description for the coupon code INVEST on the Canada Money Mastery program. That coupon code is expiring in 2 days, so if you've been interested in the program, check out that link in the description and see if it's a right fit for you, and I'll see you in there. And with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.